in Santa Fe. I am in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We just got Starlink set up here at our MEA campus here, and it's a little spotty. So if I drop off, or I freeze for 20 seconds occasionally, that may happen, but hopefully it doesn't. Take it away, Ed.
Perfect. Well, Mark asked me a short while ago if I could step in on his behalf. He's unable to make it today. I was looking at your bio and it's quite extensive. Do you mind kind of walking us through a little bit from the Airbnb, Everfest, and now more importantly, not more importantly, but the
Yeah.
Elder Academy. Be curious to hear a bit more about that, but maybe work us through
Yeah.
your timeline, if you will.
Sure. So I grew up in Southern California, went up north to play water polo at Stanford. So I was at Stanford for both undergrad and business school. About 2.5 years after graduating from business school, I started one of the first boutique hotel companies in the United States. Called it Joie de Vivre, meaning joy of life in French. And I ran it as the CEO for 24 years, based in San Francisco, and we created 52 boutique hotels around the state of California. So we became the second largest boutique hotelier in the US. In my late 40s, after having run the company for over 20 years, I didn't want to do it anymore, to be quite honest. I thought it was the thing I was going to want to do the rest of my life. And then once we had the dot-com bust and 9/11, and then just a few years later, the Great Recession, I was done with it. And I had written at that point 3 books, and they'd done well. One of them was a bestseller. And long story short is I was like, I want to get out of here. And yet, unfortunately, in 2008, there was no way I could leave the company that I'd started because we were potentially in a death spiral based upon the Great Recession. Speaking of death spiral, I lost 5 male friends to suicide, ages 42 to 52, during that Great Recession between 2008 and 2010. So note to self, midlife is a challenging period. And I was having my own challenges, but I also was seeing friends of mine. 3 of those 5 friends of mine were entrepreneurs whose companies went belly up during the Great Recession. So I said, like, what the hell? This midlife, I guess it is a crisis. But then I actually had an NDE. I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, and I died 9 times in 90 minutes after giving a speech on stage. And that's when I was 47 years old, and that's when my life changed. And I basically said, listen, if I could die at any moment, is this what I want to do the rest of my life? And I said no. And so over the next 2 years during the recession, I was giving mouth to mouth resuscitation to my company and my 3,500 employees. And we got through it, and I sold the company at the bottom of the market. I made good money, not great money, but enough so that I could take a couple of years off just to like lick my wounds and figure out what was next. I was really curious about festivals at that time, and that's how the Everfest Fest 300 thing came about. I'm a founding board member of Burning Man. So
Oh,
I was the first board member of the Burning Man nonprofit board that owns Burning Man. And so long story short is I went around the world to 36 festivals in 16 countries, and that was fun. Um, but then I got a call out of the blue one day when I was 52. So I sold the company around age 50. And 2 years later, I got a call from Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. This was 12 years ago. Almost nobody had ever heard of Airbnb. They were a small tech startup based in San Francisco that was disrupting the industry I knew really well, hospitality and travel. And Brian reached out and just said, listen, how would you like to help us democratize hospitality? And I was like, who the hell are you? He didn't even introduce himself. That was just his first line. And he came over and spent 4 hours with me that afternoon and convinced me that I should be the modern elder of Airbnb. And I was like, "Wow, you're making fun of my age." And he said, Chip, you're 52. The average age in the company is 26. Elder is a relative term. And let's be honest, you're older than everybody else. But he said, from what I know of you, you fit this definition of modern elder. A modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. So it's not about just dispensing wisdom. It's about like being curious. And
yep.
you've never worked in a tech company before. So we want you to come in, be the in-house mentor to the 3 founders, be the head of global hospitality and strategy for the company, and take us from this little tech startup to become the most valuable hospitality company in the world. And that's what I did over the next 7.5 years. 4 years full-time, 3.5 years part-time. And during Q&A, when you and I are talking, and then the Q&A for the audience, I could talk a lot more about Airbnb. Still have a very close relationship with the founders.
Good,
And yeah,
quick question. Do you want me to hold a queue of questions or a list of questions on kind of a parking lot and we can get to them at the end? Or do you want people to raise hands as we go through? What do you prefer?
why don't we, you and I talk for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll go to questions, and then I can always talk more. Does that
Perfect. So
sound good?
anyone that has questions through the process, if you want to put it to me in the notes, and then we'll get to them at the end, or you can ask it at the end. Thank you. Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
and we'll make sure we'll get to them, in 15 or 20 minutes, because I think I don't, sometimes people have to leave early. So yeah, what an experience. What an experience to be helping to steer the rocket ship at Airbnb. So I was sort of like Darth Vader. I went to the dark side um, because I was the hotelier who went to Airbnb. And so that was fascinating. And I learned a lot about intergenerational collaboration. And I started writing a book after my 4 years of full-time called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, and about my Airbnb experience. And as I was writing that book, I was in Baja in Mexico, an hour north of a place called Cabo San Lucas that's sort of well known. So I'm, on the Pacific coast in my home writing a book. I went for a run on the beach one day, and I had a Baja aha. And the Baja aha was an epiphany of, why don't we have midlife wisdom schools? I really did not like my late 40s, but I loved my 50s. I had friends who took their own lives in their 40s and early 50s. And what was becoming more clear to me is that, we're all living longer on average. And so if you're 54 years old, you may have half of your adult life still ahead of you if you start counting at age 18, because 54 is halfway between 18 and 90. And so I decided to create the world's first midlife wisdom school. I called it the Modern Elder Academy, based upon what the founders called me, but it's better known as MEA. The first campus is in Mexico on the beach, and the second campus is where I am right now. It's a 2,600-acre regenerative horse ranch with 2 retreat centers on it in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so that's my story. A new book called Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. This is my 7th book. Became a US bestseller when it came out earlier this year. And in sum, I would just say my career, has had really these 3 chapters. 1 as a very young CEO, 2 as the modern elder at Airbnb, and 3 as really a teacher, author, and educational entrepreneur, who deeply believes that we need more schools, tools, rites of passage, and rituals for people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, so that you don't feel like at 55 years old, somehow, your life is has passed you by, and your best years are behind you. So that's how, and we've had over, like 5,200 people come through our week-long programs from 50 countries. And we have 28 regional chapters around the world.
Wow. What's the makeup of a modern elder? Typically, the 5,200 people that have come through. There's got to be some level, I think, of consistency or cohesion of the people that are coming through. What's the makeup?
Yeah, average age is 54. They fit into a few different profiles. Sometimes it depends on the theme of the workshop. Sometimes they're like CEOs who want to leave their jobs, or they're entrepreneurs who are selling their companies. Sometimes they're people who've actually gone through a divorce or some personal tragedy in their life, or empty nest. Their kids have moved away, and they're trying to figure out what's next, in terms of their relationship. So it's both professional and personal in terms of why people come. The average workshop has about 24 people in it. And we have financial aid, so that means it's not just affluent people. It's a variety of folks. And because they come from all over the world, that's what makes it really interesting, is how someone is feeling about age 50 in Korea might be different than it is in Brazil or in Mexico, or in Australia. And so we have people come in from all over the world because we've been lucky enough to have, a lot of high profile people come to MEA in the 6.5 years we've been open.
It's amazing. Can you talk a bit about the curriculum, how do you design it, and the learning process while they're there?
Yeah, what I think I learned in really doing a deep dive on midlife is that there's this thing called the U curve of happiness. It's social science research from all over the world, and what it shows is that there's a long, slow decline in life satisfaction from our early 20s to about 45 to 50 when it bottoms out. To be exact, 47.2. Your mileage may vary, but 47.2 is the low point in life satisfaction. So there's a lot of reasons for that. And again, during Q&A, feel free to ask questions about why is 45 to 50 the low point. But then after age 50, people get happier with each decade. So people are happier in their 50s than 40s, 60s than 50s, 70s than 60s, and women in their 80s happier than 70s. So that's interesting because the societal narrative on aging is like, man, if you can get through your midlife crisis, you have disease, decrepitude, and death. But actually, we get happier after age 50. The other piece of research that stood out to me was this woman, Becca Levy, a well-known professor from Yale University. And her research showed that when people shift their mindset on aging in midlife from a negative to a positive, they gain 7.5 years of additional life, which is more life than if you stop smoking at 50, start exercising at 50, or, hacking things that have become very popular. And so it's like, oh, interesting. And so I talked with Becca and I said, listen, what if we created a living laboratory where people at MEA could learn the following? And this gets to your question. They can learn everything from how to shift our mindset on aging, so that, my book, Learning to Love Midlife, the subtitle of the book is 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. And so what we really help people see is like what does get better with age. We know what gets worse with age, our short-term memory, our body, a few other things, but there's a bunch of things that get better with age. And I can talk about that later if you want. And so then the three pillars of our program are navigating transitions. And we go through a lot of the transitions in midlife and beyond. Cultivating purpose, once you've sold your company, or even frankly, if you're just sort of getting bored with what you've been doing, purpose becomes a really important piece of, living a good, healthy life. And then finally, the third one is owning wisdom. And this is one that, is my favorite of the three, because I think we're moving out of the knowledge era into the wisdom era. And what I mean by that is all of the world's knowledge is on ChatGPT. And so knowledge has become a commodity. And I'd hate to be the owner of a school that trains software developers, because guess what? That's a profession that's was on the rise for the last 30 or 40 years, maybe on the decline. And so wisdom is different than knowledge. So our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom. So how do you create an environment where people make sense of their wisdom? They metabolize their experience in a way to actually distill down the key lessons, and then they use those lessons moving forward, and then they share them with others. And so if you go to the MEA website, which is meawisdom.com, at the bottom footer, there's a free resource called Why Successful Leaders Value Wisdom. And it really goes into some depth on wisdom management practices. Because, in the last 50 years, we've become very familiar with knowledge management practices. But now it's time for us to look at how do we create wiser teams and leaders, and wiser companies.
Out of curiosity, there's a lot of information around people going to boot camps, whether it be health or wellness, or whatever the case may be, and then they get home and kind of fall off the cliff because they don't have that support group. What are some of the key takeaways, and how do you maintain that with the people that come into the program? And just curious a bit more about how to keep that moving.
Yeah, it's a great question, Ed. So when you're in a cohort for a 5-night program, you get to know everybody really well. And so the cohort stays together. So the cohort sometimes has weekly calls, sometimes monthly calls. Zoom calls, and they stay in touch, and you have an accountability partner within your cohort. So there's that. Then
Yeah.
you're also placed in a regional chapter. And so there's, as I said, 28 regional chapters around the world. And those regional chapters are very active. Last year, they did 225 events around the world
Wow.
between those 28 different chapters. So that's another thing that helps people to stay together. And then we have all kinds of alumni programs. We just had an alumni reunion, what we call homecoming, here in Santa Fe. We had 500 people from 8 countries, 37 U.S. states show up for a weekend, reunion and education experience. So there's a lot of tools, and we have a subscription service that people can pay just a little bit extra to be involved in that. And then we have MEA coaches as well. So it's a full holistic program.
Mm.
It's not sort of a one and done kind of thing. It's, there's definitely ways for people to stay in touch and to continue to be curious about what they can learn.
That's great. We were talking before about longevity and about how people are living longer, and you touched on it as well. And it was probably 5 or 6 years ago that I realized that I'll most likely be around till late 80s, and that completely changed my mindset on I've got to work a lot longer, or what am I going to do?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that something I presume that the
Yeah,
elders are maybe thinking around?
yeah, one of the things that describes MEA these days is with longevity really getting a lot more attention. We're sort of like part of the new trend toward longevity travel. How do you travel to a place to have an experience that's going to actually both maybe extend your life, but also improve your life? So it's, how we call it long life learning, not lifelong learning, but long life learning, how to create a life that's as deep and meaningful as it is long. And so yes, when when you're going to live 10 years longer than you thought you're going to live, it shifts your thinking about your relationship with money. How do you make sure you don't run out of money? It may shift your perspective on what you want to do with your life. One of my favorite questions, and part of the MEA program, is about asking life-changing questions so that we could create life-changing conversations. So I love this question, which is 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? When I moved to Mexico when I was 56 or 57, before I'd started the MEA campus there, the question I asked myself is 10 years from now, what will I regret living in Mexico if I don't learn it and do it now? And the obvious first one was like, I need to learn Spanish. And then the second one was, I need to learn how to surf because I lived on the beach, and just down the beach from us was a famous surf break. And yet at age 57, I had a mindset, a fixed mindset. It's one of the other things we teach at MEA is how to move from a fixed to a growth mindset. But I had a fixed mindset saying, I'm too old to learn Spanish and I'm too old to learn to surf. But when I put it in the package, in the thought of like, well, 10 years from now, I'll regret. At 67, I'll regret if I didn't learn Spanish or learn to
Yeah.
surf now, because it'll actually be harder then. And so anticipated regret is a form of wisdom, and it can be a catalyst for us to try something that's hard and new now. And so that's, yes, the answer to your question is longevity is, and the idea of the 100-year life, which was written by Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan in London. If we're living that much longer, it really requires us to choreograph or recurate how we live our lives. And don't think that at age 55 you don't have a lot of surprises and excitement ahead of you. If you operate that way, you will get bored, and quite frankly, you will probably reduce the number of years you live on the planet, because curiosity and an openness to new experience are two of the direct correlates to living a longer life.
That's amazing. I think I heard you mention earlier that MEA is 6 years. Is that correct? Something around that?
Yeah,
And
6.5.
28 chapters. Out of curiosity, what's your kind of forward looking? Where do you see this going? What's your expectations? We know through the boutique hotel and the exponential growth of Airbnb.
Yep.
Just curious what your thinking big is around that.
Yeah, I love being a disruptor, and being one of the first boutique hoteliers, and then also Airbnb means that I have a bit of reputation for that too. Um, I think that I love creating these campuses. I mean, this campus that we've just built here in Santa Fe is on 2,600 acres. It's 4 square miles. It's got ponds and arroyos and dozens of hiking, biking, and horseback riding trails. So I love that. I love the hospitality piece of that, but I also love the education piece of it. So our regional chapters are really the hubs for how do we scale this globally, as opposed to saying Chip is going to have 7 or 20 or 30 dots on a map of
Yep.
all these campuses. So so our regional chapters are where we do events. We have some of our guest faculty come and do events there, and then it's a way for us to sort of have a mobile approach to the movement, because what started as a community has sort of become a movement of modern elders, and a movement of midlifers, and and by the way, I define midlife quite broadly based upon spending a lot of time with sociologists.
Oh, the internet might have paused for a second. Usually is back quite quickly.
They have a lot of spinning plates, you got sandwich generation, etc. 50 to 60 is the core of midlife. Oop, did you lose me
Yeah,
again?
we missed you for a second. You said you described midlife quite loosely based on being with a lot of psychologists, and then you paused.
35 to 75 is what I consider midlife, which is a long time. 35 to 50 is early midlife, and early midlife is when we go through a lot of disappointments, a lot of challenges. It's frankly, again, where the lowest point of life satisfaction is. 50 to 60 is where you feel some liberation, and like, you know what? I don't have to do those things that I used to do. And I don't care as much about people who I don't really like. And I am going to create some space in my life to try some new things. And so that's an actually interesting period. It was, as I said, my favorite decade. And then 60 to 75 is the third stage of midlife. And that's, the reason I think that that's still midlife is because for a lot of people, they're still working. And for a lot of people, if you're going to live to 100 or 90, there's really three stages to life. There's early adulthood, the middle of adulthood, which is midlife, and then later adulthood. And I think, early adulthood's 18 to 35, and later adulthood's 75 till when you pass. So midlife is then this marathon, a very long bridge in between those two.
Maybe last question on my side, then we'll open it up. I feel like I've asked you a lot, but very curious subject matters. When you talk about the different ages of midlife, are there different focuses that you have based on those? I suspect that there are, but I'd be curious just to kind of understand
Yeah.
those transitions a little bit.
Yeah, 35 to 50 is a period of time, and a lot of you may be in that era, where Brené Brown, the sociologist who's a friend of ours and loves MEA, she calls it the midlife unraveling. And what she means by that is it's when you start to unravel all of your expectations and of the world and of yourself. And what does that mean to unravel it? It means that you start to let go of some of what you thought you needed to do or wanted to do or had to do. And what that does is give you the opportunity to get to a place of saying, well, what is it I really want to do? And so 35 to 50 is rough. It's also when we tend to be the busiest in our lives, especially if we have kids. And so the solutions for that are what I call the Great Midlife Edit, and we did it here on campus yesterday with a group. And it's when you start to let go of the mindsets and identities and obligations, and sometimes even the relationships that just aren't serving you anymore. And that allows you to have some space in your life. 50 to 60, the solution for that is to be curious and open to trying new things. For me, it was Spanish and surfing and moving to another country. For Ed, you're living in a different place as well. Are you in your 50s? What age are you?
Not yet, 46.
Okay. Well, so
On the cusp.
dude, you're at that low point, but I think you're curating your life pretty well, actually. So good for you. And then 60 to 75 is when you start to make sense of all the wisdom you've learned. And you start to ask the question, like, how am I going to share that? How do I, there's a word called generativity. How am I generative? Meaning, how do I allow things to come through me and share it with people younger than me? But also, how do I start curating the latter? So, yeah. So let's jump to the questions, see what questions have come up.
Chip, you're still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Uh-huh.
All right, perfect. We're getting a little break up there, but the question was from Heather. Do you run anything in Portugal currently?
We do not have any programs in Portugal. We have some alumni in Portugal, and we have alumni in Spain as well. We have a lot of alums in the UK. So there is a London or a UK chapter, and then there's a continental Europe chapter, but that's exclusively alumni. So sometimes the way people actually become alums is they go through one of our online programs. So we have an online program that starts next week called Living and Working on Purpose. It's an 8-week program. It's actually unlike any online education you've ever done before. It's what we call digital intimacy. You really get to know people very well. Yes, you're doing some asynchronous learning, but a lot of it is, in smaller groups and on Zoom calls with larger groups. And it's really an amazing collection of faculty, Arthur Brooks, John Donahue, the CEO of Nike, a whole collection of interesting people. So one of the things you could do, Heather, if you wanted to, is to sign up for that course next week. It's obviously a lot more affordable because of the fact it's online, and then you can become an alumni.
Perfect. And my apology, I think I'm pronouncing it wrong, but Shefali, is that right? Sorry.
You got it right.
How wonderful. I'm so embarrassed.
No, I would have corrected you. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chip.
Shefali, are you Indian? Do you come from
I am
Indian?
Indian, yes.
So when I was going on that festival tour, I went to the Mahakumbh Mela.
Oh my God.
In 2013 in Allahabad with 100 million people. Oh my gosh. Crazy.
Biggest gathering of human beings. It really is.
Exactly.
Every 12 years, luckily, not frequently.
Exactly.
So you caught it. You caught the last one. The next one, I think, would be what, next year? Yeah.
Next year.
Next year, yes. So thank you. This is very interesting to me. I first learned about the MEA through Aviva Wittenberg-Cox because she attended in person.
Yep.
And in her newsletter, she wrote about the online academy. So it's on my list. I will one day get there. There are quite a lot of interesting nuggets in everything you said. And two things stand out, which will be a question and then, two sub-bullets to explain why that's a question. The question is about the gender differences you have found in your work on helping people through transitions. And the reason for kind of asking that question is, one thing you mentioned is that women are known in research to be happiest in their 80s. And I think a flippant reason might be all men in their life die, so they have no care versions. And the second one, I think I ask the gender differences because there is a lot, not just written about, around us, we observe about the loneliness of men. Women have so many friendships and relationships that carry us through any kind of difficulty. But men just don't have that kind of friendly intimacy. And you would have noticed the difference culturally in India. Indian men are very tactile and they hold hands and they will talk and josh with each other a lot more. And living in the West, I noticed the only place men are allowed to touch each other is on the sports ground. And if they touch each other otherwise, then there is a challenge, of they have to assert their sexuality as masculine and so on. So I wonder if there are these factors that play in, because the life stages that you just described, 35 to 70, the breakdown, it kind of reminds me of the 4 ashrams of living in the Hindu philosophy, which says begins with studentship and so on and so forth, right? So I just kind of,
you end up with the forest dweller, right? There's a forest dweller. Yes.
So I just kind of was trying to wrap everything into a question about say a bit more about gender differences as observed by you?
Well, so both observed by me, having over 5,000 people go through the program, but also based upon social science research. The number one word that describes men in their 50s in terms of their biggest fear is irrelevance. And for women, it's invisibility. And this is primarily Western-based research. And so let's unpack that for a moment. For men, irrelevance is a tough one because, frankly, up until that decade of their life, they have been on the growth path of their career, and to feel relevant made them feel useful and therefore valuable. And so men's level of self-confidence in their careers actually plateaus in their 50s. Women's confidence in their careers actually continues to escalate in their 50s. So women are on the rise in their 50s still. But where women actually have some challenges is feeling invisible. And that has two pieces to it. Number one is invisibility around the physical form. And, women have spent, in their teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, being noticed for their looks. And often when you get to your 50s, that happens less. And we have an unfortunate situation where we call men silver foxes, like Richard Gere and George Clooney. But when it comes to women, if you have a woman who has some attraction, and especially if she's potentially dating a younger man, you call her a cougar, which is it has a derogatory flavor to it. So silver fox versus cougar. So clearly that is sexist in many ways against women. But for women, the invisibility is not just in terms of not being seen in romantically or physically, but it's also potentially not being seen in societally or even in companies. Just at the time when they're actually building their courage, their confidence in work, sometimes they're actually passed over because of ageism. And sometimes ageism along with sexism. So long story short is the experiences that men have in their 50s or in the core of midlife are very influenced by how much they've invested in their social wellness, in their relationships. So you have it, exactly right. Men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are so busy, and they let their friendships atrophy. They do not think of friendship as a practice. And whereas women, because of the socialization of girls, are much more open to be, candid and vulnerable, and they build relationships with each other in such a way that, when they're going through the 20s and 30s and 40s and they've got a lot going on, they're still staying in touch. And when they're going through a difficult time, they're actually more in touch. And so this is why the suicide rate, unfortunately, for men is 4 to 5 times higher than it is for women. And it's part of the reason I created MEA, because of my 5 male friends, ages 42 to 52, who took their lives. So great questions. You are very well suited to come to MEA, either to a workshop or one of our online programs. So I appreciate what you've asked, and I hope you'll enjoy. Everybody take a look at the bottom of the MEA website, meawisdom.com. There's so many great free resources there. Another one, I mentioned why successful leaders value wisdom, but another one is the anatomy of a transition. It's really quite good and
Can
written
I
by our
ask a
team.
follow-up question and just be
Sure.
cheeky? I see no
Yeah.
other hands up yet. Have you found in your work and your research differences between neurotypical and autistic persons or persons with autism?
I've done zero research on that. I have autistic friends in my life, but in the context, we have had neurodiverse people come to MEA. In fact, an Irish guy was one of our first MEA students, and the experience for him to go through, he had just found out about his diagnosis. He was in his mid-50s, but really didn't realize that he was neurodiverse, and it was a revelatory experience for him to go through MEA as a result of that. But we have done zero research on our own on that. So I've just read some things, but not a lot. So it's not something I know much about.
Yep, that actually led me into a question that I had, which is, can you talk us through the research that's gone behind the program and the
Yeah.
extensive, I have to imagine there's a tremendous amount of research that's gone through that, but just the journey that you've had and where you
Yeah.
look for most recent up-to-date information.
Yeah, our faculty comes from Harvard, Stanford, Yale, UC Berkeley, and a few other schools. And their expertise is often on what gets better with age. So Arthur Brooks at Harvard, his book From Strength to Strength, which actually profiles MEA, really speaks to the idea that as we get older, our fluid intelligence declines, which is being fast and focused with the brain, which is part of the reason why short-term memory is not as good. But our crystallized intelligence improves. So our ability to connect the dots and think systemically and holistically actually gets better up until around our early 70s. So yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason why a lot of knowledge workers are feeling like, I don't want to retire at 60, because actually my brain, I feel like I'm better able to solve problems and see the big picture and do pattern recognition and have wisdom now than I ever was before. And so in some ways, we study retirement. We've worked a lot with academics on retirement, and retirement accelerates your mortality rate by 2 years. So I'm not saying people shouldn't retire, but the worst kind of retirement is working 100% on a Friday and then on Monday working 0%. That is if you want to actually accelerate your mortality, do that. Because what happens is people lose a sense of purpose, they lose a sense of community, and often they lose the structure and discipline in their life to have wellness in their life. And more than anything, they actually just have this big empty hole. And in the United States, unfortunately, the average retiree watches 47 hours of TV a week. So it's sort of like they probably worked 47 hours a day, 47 hours a week. So they just basically turned work into TV, and that's not healthy for you. And so the process of learning how to move from so I have 8 Ernst & Young partners here this week, and taking them through the process of retiring, because they're all turning 60, and at Ernst & Young you actually have to retire at age 60 if you're a partner. So how do we help them to understand how to create a portfolio career where they have multiple ways they're using their time and making money in their 60s? And that's not something that people thought about 30 or 40 years ago. You sort of retired and you had your pension possibly, and you lived on a golf course or played bingo. But that is not necessarily how a lot of us want to live our lives. So yeah, I mean, the Stanford professors, both Laura Carstensen from the Stanford Center on Longevity and Carol Dweck, who popularized the idea of mindset, both have been very influential to the program. And my favorite is Dacher Keltner from UC Berkeley, who started the Greater Good Science Center and helped us to see that actually one of the most important things that we need to do as we get older is to introduce and seek out awe, AWE. And his book, Awe, the same title, which came out last year, is a spectacular book for understanding why awe is life affirming and actually can extend your life. So we live in an era where there's all these, Silicon Valley biohackers who want to live forever, and they've come up with all kinds of scientific ways to do that. But quite frankly, the most evident way for people to live longer and happier lives is not about sitting in an ice bath or doing cryotherapy or infrared yeah, all of that's good. I'm not saying it's not. But it's not very. There's not a lot of evidence yet to show the data on this. Where there's a lot of evidence is on the socio emotional side of things or socio-psychological side of things. Whether it's Becca Levy's work around shifting your mindset on aging, or it's Dacher's work on introducing awe in your life, or Bob Waldinger at Harvard, his work, which has shown that the number one variable for people who live into their 80s and 90s and are happy is how invested were you in your social relationships in your 50s and beyond.
Wonderful. Heather, did you want to ask the question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Do you include sharing wisdom and give advice on being a good mentor?
Oh my gosh. Heather, I love you. Yes, that's exactly what we do. And that's what my book Wisdom at Work is all about. But yes, we actually literally have workshops on mentorship and intergenerational collaboration, and how to be a great mentor, and frankly, how to be a mentern. Because when I was at Airbnb, I had 100 mentees over the course of my 7.5 years. But I was a mentern. I was as much an intern as I was a mentor. I was a mentor and an intern, which is why it's a mentern. And that meant that I was teaching a lot of times, but I was also learning. And I think the best relationships I had were mutual mentorship relationships where I was learning something from someone on one topic, and then I was teaching that same person something on another topic. So I knew a lot about one thing, they knew a lot about another thing, and we wanted to learn from each other. And I think that kind of mutual mentorship, especially for larger companies that can create a matchmaking technology within the company, is dynamite as a learning and development tool.
That's fabulous. I've heard a lot around Ernst & Young and other people that have attended. And one thing that I was thinking is people that have been married in relationships that are transitioning together. Do you find them coming through the program together and how that helps them make that journey together?
Yeah, here's an interesting stat, Ed. Only 11%, and this is a US statistic, only 11% of people retire at the same time. And I don't know if that means the same year or the same month or whatever, but it's, there's usually an unevenness. One person's retiring earlier than the other. So that can actually lead to some really big challenges that are becoming more evident over time. Where in fact, I have a daily blog called Wisdom Well. If you go to the MEA website and sign up for it, it's free. You just get a daily email from me. And I have a blog post coming out, I don't know when, maybe tomorrow or in the next few days, about the 5 different types of retirement personalities, in terms of how people look at retirement. And it's like the 5 love languages. It's the five retirement languages. And being able to have a conversation with your partner, your spouse, around how you want to do retirement is particularly important. So we have a workshop called Reframing Retirement. It's both an online course as well as a course here in our Santa Fe campus in early September, which people come on their own, but sometimes people come as couples as well, because actually coming as a couple allows you to have a common language, and and you can just coming as a couple will save you a lot of money in therapy.
Are there any other questions from the group?
Yeah, while we're at it, let me just put in the MEA website. I saw that they put the cultivating purpose. So that's if people want to learn more there, that's where the blog is located as well. So if people want to learn about that, and yeah, and learning to love midlife, really if this was interesting to you, you can learn a lot more in this book, because the book actually talks a lot about what I was chatting about today.
That's absolutely fabulous. Shippy did a wonderful job. Summary key takeaways before we wind up.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is this: it's like you have a lot more life ahead of you than you think, and generally speaking, on average, you may be happier in that second half of your adult life than you thought, for all kinds of interesting reasons that I talk about in this book. And there's a bunch of things that get better with age, whether it's everything from emotional intelligence to your wisdom, to your ability to edit the things in your life you don't enjoy anymore, to your own personal narrative, understanding who you are, and actually accepting yourself a little bit more and having a sense of humor, to the fact that actually, as we get older, we shift out of the egocentric part of our life and into a period of our life where we're really focused on serving others, and maybe a little bit more curiosity around our spirituality and our soul. So that's a long-winded way of saying a summary.
Yeah, perfect. I've had a wonderful time. Again, any other questions from the group? No? Chip,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
yeah.